So a lot of people were requesting the story of the smiling man. And I'm gonna be doing Tate's makeup in American Horror Story. About 5 years ago, I lived downtown at a major city of the US. And I've always been a pretty big night person. And I would honestly find myself pretty bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, would go to sleep. So to pass the time, I would often go for pretty long walks and just spend my time thinking. And I spent years like this, walking alone at night, not really having a reason to ever be afraid. I literally used to joke with my roommate about how even drug dealers in the city were polite. But this all changed in a matter of a few minutes one evening. So it was a Wednesday around 1 or 2 in the morning. I was walking through a police patrolled park quite a ways from my apartment. It was a very quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic, no one really on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I had to turn down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment, and that's when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street on my side was a silhouette of a man dancing. Deciding that he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me by. But the closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky and wearing a gray suit. And he danced closer until I could make out his face. Go to the next part. Part 2 to the smiling man. His eyes were open and wild and his head was tilted back slightly. He was looking off into the sky. And on his mouth was a painfully wide, cartoonish almost smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to go ahead and cross the street before he could get any closer. As I went to the other side of the street, I took my eyes off him for a second and then I glanced back. And I stopped completely dead in my tracks. He had not only stopped dancing, but he was standing parallel to me with one foot on the street, facing me but still looking up to the sky with a big smile on his lips. I was completely unnerved by this, so I decided to keep walking but keep my eyes on the man. And he stopped moving. And once there was about a half a block in between us, I decided to go ahead and turn away for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. Everything in front of me still completely empty. I looked back to where he was once standing, and for the briefest moment, I was relieved because I didn't see him there. But that's when I noticed him crouching, across the street, still facing me. I had only looked away for about 10 seconds, so he was fast. I was shocked and stood there staring at him, and that's when he started to move towards me. He took giant, exaggerated tiptoed steps, literally as if he was a cartoon character trying to sneak up on me. Except he was moving very quickly. I'd like to say that I ran away or took out pepper spray, but I didn't. I just stood there staring frozen. He continued to creep towards me and then stopped about a car's length away. When I finally found my voice, I tried to ask him what the F does he want, but it came out more of like a whimper than a command. I could hear the fear in my own voice, but he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there smiling. Go to the last part. Last part to the smiling man. So after what felt like forever, he turned around and started to slowly dance walk away. Not wanting to turn my back on him again, I went ahead and watched him until he was far away and almost out of sight. And then I realized something. He wasn't moving away from me anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape grew larger and larger. He was coming back, and this time he was running. I ran too until I was off the side road and onto a better lit road with more traffic. And looking behind me, he was nowhere to be found. The whole way home, I continued to glance back over my shoulder, expecting to see his stupid smile. But he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 more months after that night, and I never took another walk again. There's something about his face that has always haunted me. He looked completely and utterly sane, and that's a very scary thing. So this Reddit thread continues on and talks about other people's experiences with seeing this man, so let me know if you guys want to hear any of those. So someone impersonated my therapist and then came after me. So I have another crazy Reddit story for you guys today, and I feel like this crazy contour look actually fits the story so well. So when I was 9 years old, my mother left me to pursue her dreams and discover who she was. And this was all because her therapist, Dr. Kathleen Porter, said that she couldn't be a good wife or mom unless she learned to put herself first. So after she left my dad, brother, and I, my dad stuck me with my first therapist. I would draw her pictures, and she would always tell my dad what they meant. A dark sky meant I was sad, and a house with one window meant that I felt trapped. I only saw my mom a couple more times in my life, once when she was passing through Colorado to go to a motivational speaking conference. We met at a diner, she talked about herself. And another time after I graduated when I decided to visit her at her home in Tuscan. I had been struggling to hold on to relationships and I wanted an apology from the woman who abandoned me. And I thought if I got one, I'd be able to move on with my life, but my therapist warned me against this. So I went to confront her. But she just told me that she saved herself by leaving our family and was forever grateful to Dr. Porter. So since since I didn't get an apology from her, I figured I would get an apology from a woman that I despise almost as much as my mother, Dr. Porter. She was still practicing. I had been keeping tabs on her for years, so I scheduled a session with her. I told her about my own mom abandoning me because she listened to a therapist and how much I struggled in my own life after that. She continued to remain expressionless, and I got the feeling that she might be a sociopath. I noticed a "You Are Enough" tattoo on her wrist. After a few more sessions of talking about this, I was hoping that Dr. Porter would catch on. So I decided that I was going to confront her. But when I sat down in her office next, there were some things that were a little bit different. Her skin was tighter, her voice was lower, and the whole office was a lot darker. She was even compassionate and reassuring whenever I brought up my mom, stating that a therapist should never tell a patient what to do. I wanted to scream, "Well, this was all because of you," but I could tell that something was different. And when she went in for a hug at the end, I noticed that her tattoo was gone. That's when I knew that this was an imposter and not Dr. Porter. Okay, go to the next part. Part 2, to someone impersonating my therapist and then coming after me. So after I got home, I started to do some Googling. Did my therapist have a secret twin? Was someone impersonating her and even going the extra lengths to get surgery? I mean, I live in LA, so it happens. I was wondering who this new Dr. Porter 2.0 was, so I kind of ended up sneaking back into her office. I was curious, and I ended up finding a key from the cleaning crew. So this allowed me to get back into her office, go through her drawers, and in her top desk drawer, she had an empty bottle of black hair dye. Not proof, but still validating. Later, I found a couple dozen note cards of all the patients and their details, including my own. Adjustment disorder, stalking history, high functioning. The stalking charge happened after I was trying to get my AirPods back from an ex. He made the whole thing into a big deal, and I was almost put on a 5150 hold because of it. I was worried that if I called the cops about Dr. Porter and knowing about my stalking charge, it may look like I was stalking my therapist and this time actually get put on hold. Dr. Porter didn't have a family, so no one close to her even knew she was gone. And I noticed that other patients seemed to prefer this Dr. Porter 2.0. Close to the end of our next session, she had to go use the restroom. So I used this as additional time to look for any clues. Walked over to her briefcase and saw a before and after Polaroid of a woman who looked a lot like Dr. Porter alongside a woman who looked exactly like Dr. Porter. I slipped it into my pocket right as she was opening back up the door. I pretended like I was looking for my earring back, but when she walked in, she picked up a letter opener from the top of her desk, which was a stainless steel razor-sharp blade. And it looked better suited to kill a small animal than open up a gas bill. She picked up a letter and stood there cutting it while smiling at me. So I decided to call the police from my burner phone after this. The dispatcher just wanted to know how I got a hold of the photo and wanted to know if I was mentally stable. She let me know that a photo wouldn't prove anything other than I was trespassing in my therapist's office. I hung up, went home, and tried to calm myself by listening to a meditation app. I fell asleep eventually, but my phone woke me up at 2:13 a.m. It was a text from an unknown number saying, "You're a thief." Okay, last part. Part 3, to someone impersonating my therapist and then coming after me. This made me freak out and confirmed that she was not the real Dr. Porter. This morning I had to go to work and I literally started to think that I was seeing her everywhere. I was bumper to bumper in LA traffic. I thought she was behind the wheel of the car sitting next to me, smiling at me. I ordered from DoorDash later that day. I thought it was her bringing me my food. When I had to go to my dentist appointment, I thought that she had come in after my dentist had left, smiling with a metal tray filled with dental instruments. And when I went on Instagram to see if the imposter had posted any recent pictures of herself, I noticed that my account had a new story that I hadn't uploaded myself. It was a photo of me with the word thief in red letters. I deleted it quickly, but how in the world did she have access to my Instagram account? I felt like I was entering into another reality. I was talking to myself like a crazy person, the stress was killing me, my hair was falling out. I started not leaving my apartment at all. I kept imagining her slicing my throat with that letter opener. I was wondering if I was really seeing her or if I was just being driven to madness. Eventually, I felt like I had no choice but to make an appointment with her again. The second I got in there, she shut the door behind me and let me know that she had been waiting for me. I wondered if I had made a mistake, but I ended up just explaining the whole situation to her. That I wasn't actually a real patient of Dr. Porter's, that I had just been going to see her to confront her eventually, because she was responsible for my mom abandoning me. And that's when Dr. Porter 2.0 let me know that she knew and that the same thing actually happened to her. She went looking for an apology from Dr. Porter and never got one herself. And that's when she decided to get rid of Dr. Porter to stop her from hurting more families. She got minor cosmetic surgery to make herself look more like Dr. Porter. She pretended to show up for her usual appointment and then killed Dr. Porter with her letter opener. She had a friend at the crematorium who helped her with the body. And she'd hired a hacking company to seamlessly transition onto Dr. Porter's digital life, but apparently also hack into my Instagram. She explained that at first she just wanted to scare me into not going to the police. After reading all of Dr. Porter's notes about me, she just wanted to talk because of our similar situations. I asked her why killing Dr. Porter wasn't enough. She stated that she had to become her to fix all the patients that she had hurt. Dr. Porter 2.0 was the best therapist I ever had. And all the shrinks before her were just wrong. Revenge isn't just sweet, it's healing. Dr. Porter 2.0 and I celebrated 7 years of marriage last year. We gave each guest at our wedding a party favor, a letter opener with our initials on it. As for my mom, I'm still waiting for her to return to LA one day and pay a visit to her old psychologist, Dr. Porter. I tagged the author to the story below. The story on Reddit has so much more detail to it, so I did my best to summarize it within 3 TikToks. Let me know what you guys think of the story and what Reddit story you want to hear next. Okay, so since everyone literally requested this today, we're going to be talking about the Russian sleep experiment. So in the height of World War II, Russian scientists wanted to find a way to keep their soldiers awake longer. And in order to do this, they decided to test the effects of extreme sleep deprivation. They rounded up 5 prisoners of war and were like, hey, if you do this, we'll grant you your freedom. So they put them all inside of this sealed glass chamber that would continue to release this stimulant gas that would keep them awake. And apparently this gas was still in the experimental stages, so they didn't really know what would happen with it. But they were pretty confident that it wouldn't kill them at the least. So they begin, and the first 3 to 4 days goes pretty great. Everyone's overall pretty optimistic, pumping the gas, the prisoners are staying awake. But day 4 is when they started to see a pretty big change in their subjects. The subjects went from small talk to talking about really dark things like their traumas. They started to complain about the experiment as well. And on day 6, the participants actually stopped talking to each other entirely and even got paranoid. Each of them segregated themselves off in their own section of the chamber. A few of them began to believe that they could sell out their comrades in order to get out of the experiment. They tried to get each other in trouble, but the researchers didn't care. They were just there to observe. But on day 9, things took a significant turn whenever one of them just started screaming and running around. He went back and forth across the chamber for about 2 to 3 hours until he was just making a squeaking noise. And it was later found out that he had actually torn his own vocal cords from screaming so much. And the other subjects did not react to this whatsoever. Instead, the other participants reacted by ripping out parts of the books that were given to them to entertain them during this experiment. They soaked them in toilet water and started to place them over the glass so that the researchers could no longer see in. And you're going to be shocked by what happens next. Part 2 to the Russian sleep experiment. So there's wet paper completely covering all the windows in the chamber. Their vision is completely obscured and it's been silent for about 3 days. I don't really know how this works, but I guess they were monitoring the oxygen consumption in the room and they could still tell that there was about like 4 to 5 people still alive in there. But after this 3 days of silence, they concurred that either the microphones were broken or something was extremely wrong with the subjects. Either way, they were gonna have to get into the chamber. They decided to use the intercom and were like, hey, we gotta get into the room. Everyone needs to lay on the ground and comply. And if you comply, then one of you gets to be free. Well, one of the subjects ends up hopping on the microphone, verifying that it wasn't broken and states, we no longer wish to be free. So the researchers being like, okay, they're alive and I guess the microphones work. We'll just continue the experiment. Well, the silence continues up to the 15th day, and on the 15th day, the experiment is over, so they go ahead, turn off the stimulant, and turn on the fresh air. And this is when they hear the subjects not only start screaming, but start to beg for them to turn the gas back on. And while they're begging and pleading, the researchers open the chamber. And what they find is straight out of a nightmare. They had turned on all the water in their bathrooms and had completely flooded the room to about 4 inches. And the participant who had died had chunks of flesh taken from its leg and from its chest. This was used to also jam the drain in the center of the room. The other 4 subjects in the room seemed to have chunks of their flesh missing as well, but it was self-inflicted. And their food storage hadn't been touched in days, so they were eating themselves. This story gets way more shocking. But this is the last part of the Russian sleep experiment. So even though the experiment was up, none of the subjects even wanted to leave the chamber and they all wanted the gas turned back on. So they made the decision to send some soldiers in to go get them, but one of them reacted so violently that he bit the soldier in the neck and the soldier bled to death. Another subject ruptured his spleen in the process of trying to move him and also bled to death. So now they have 2 casualties, but finally they're able to get the other 3 out. They immediately take them to the hospital because they're emaciated and they have severe injuries from the chunks of flesh being gone. The first one, who was the most injured, was immediately brought back to surgery, but it seemed as though the sedatives weren't working on him. It does absolutely nothing and he just keeps begging for the gas. They administer the anesthesia and somehow this starts to make him even stronger, so much so that he actually rips a leather strap that was keeping him down on the bed. They give him 10 times the usual dose and he falls asleep and dies. So they move on to the next, which was the guy who tore his vocal cords, and he obviously couldn't speak anymore, so he was just shaking his head no as they approached him with the anesthetic. He starts to fight back, but then gets so exhausted that he actually passes out, and the second he passes out, he dies. So now there's just one left, and since they keep dying, they decide to give in to what they want, and they put him back into the chamber and turn the gas on. As they're prepping him to do so, they put an EKG on him to measure his brain waves. And this is when they realize that he actually flatlines each time his eyes close. So each time he blinks, he actually goes brain dead. And before they can get the gas back on, he falls asleep and dies, and nobody really knows what killed him. So obviously, if you guys grew up on creepypasta, you know the story really, really well. And you know that it's fiction. But the thing is that during this time, there were so many different unethical human experiments going on. And we've talked about things like Project MK Ultra on here before, so it just doesn't seem that far off that something like this would happen. So as wild and as scary as it is, there might actually be some truth here. Let me know what story you guys would like me to talk about next. So just think of any situation in which you would have to sell your soul in order to have the body of an owl. I can't think of one either. So what exactly is an owl witch, and what are some of the theories behind them? I'm gonna be making myself into an owl for this. So Robstown, Texas is a very small town in Texas, and whenever people started to report seeing this half bird, half human thing flying around, word traveled fast. And this caused people to, rightfully so, go a little crazy. It would sometimes be reported that it was a head of a human and the body of an owl, or that the head was an owl and there was other human-like features going on with the body. But it seems like people were just not taking it seriously enough until a couple of officers actually saw and made a report on this creature, saying that it was a giant bird with a human face and red glowing eyes. And after that, reportings of this thing just spread all over Texas. But the next reported sighting didn't happen until New Year's Day of 1967. Two girls by the name of Tracy Lawson and Jackie Davies were actually hanging out whenever Jackie saw that there was something flying overhead, and she grabbed her binoculars. And not even another week later, a man by the name of Alvarico Guajardo actually reported an alien-like creature slamming into the side of his trailer. And that it was like a bird, but not a bird. And another week after this, a guy by the name of Armando Grimaldi actually went outside to take a smoke break whenever he was dive bombed by the creature. And his injuries were so bad that he actually had to go to Wells County Hospital, and he reported that the thing had a gorilla-like face. And as more reports were made, it kind of went mainstream. It was on the Johnny Carson show, some people were spoofing it on TV. And then soon after, this thing weirdly appeared after a call to the police, but Captain Melvin Arnold said that this thing was all just a prank done by teenagers. Which is strange, but then the reports started to stop. But many people think that this is more than just a strange-looking bird, but instead the Mexican urban legend of La Lechuza. Go to the next part. Part 2 to Owl Witches. So what exactly is the legend of La Lechuza? So there's a couple of different tales in Mexican folklore that explain exactly what this is. One of the many versions of the story is about a woman who was practicing witchcraft in a village and was murdered by the villagers, so she later came back as an owl in order to seek revenge. The story is kind of reminiscent of the Rat Man of Southend England, which is about a homeless man who was wrongfully beaten by a group of teenagers and later came back to seek revenge in the form of a rat. So it's possible that they both gained their features from the same otherworldly life. There's always the classic theory that a woman made the oldest deal in the book, selling her soul to the devil. She may have been seeking powers, but the deal was to be a witch by day and an owl by night. And no promises that this is gonna be good, by the way. But this creature will target you and lure you in. And will do this by making a sound of a crying baby, or will sometimes even make a whistling noise right outside your door, waiting to tear their victims apart and do what with them, eat them, use their soul, I don't know. So you might be asking yourself, are these creatures actually real? So Jeremy and I were like, we should go to this part of Texas and see what we can find. So because of this, we decided to drive 12 hours and go to areas where there's reported sightings of owl witches. And y'all won't even believe what happens to us in the video, but it should be uploaded onto my YouTube.